Okay, we are live. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sejal Thacker, and I'm the Chief Culture Officer at Nobody Studios. In this special live stream series, this is episode 1 of the making of a Nobody. I'm going to be taking you on an incredible, raw, and unfiltered journey with our very own Chief Nobody, Mark McNally himself. And so I've known Mark just a short time. It's only been almost 2.5 years. And we've had to go through some crazy twists and turns while we're building a venture studio from scratch during a global pandemic. And so we're going to get into behind the scenes. We're going to peel back all the layers and really talk to Mark about, what his journey has been about, what's gotten him here, and how we've been navigating through all of that stuff. So welcome to the show, Mark.
Thanks, Sejal. Super excited to be here.
Yes, me too. I know. And, I wanted to start off with a quote. I told you this before we went live, is that as I was preparing sort of, some of the areas that I'm really fascinated by your journey and areas that I want to dig deep on, I remembered the words of a great philosopher. And I wanted to share this quote with everybody. Ralph Waldo Emerson, he said, "Do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail." And Mark, I've gotten to know you well. You are a true trailblazer, and your journey is really a testament to Emerson's work. So let's start right from the beginning, right? You've had over 25 years, 14 different startups, and we're going to talk about, some of those in a little bit. But before we do that, I would love to hear more about the younger Mark McNally. I've got an 11-year-old son. And I try to see life through his eyes whenever possible. They teach us so much. And so I'm curious to see what Mark McNally saw through his world. What was his world like back then?
Wow. Let me get on the couch. Let's talk about daddy issues, right? Look, I don't know. I will say I'm always grateful because I know a lot of folks in this world don't grow up with what I grew up with. So I was in a lower middle class family, nothing crazy in terms of resources. Both my parents worked hard, but, really no careers to speak of that would, stand out or get any awards or anything. But I was surrounded by love, I was surrounded by acceptance. And so it was always a safe place for me to think and dream, and nothing I ever said was judged and nothing was ever reacted to. And so I think that gave me the space to be quite creative at a young age and dream big. And, my mom will say my dad was, they're divorced now, but my dad was a little bit of a dreamer, but she never reacted when she saw me be a dreamer. She just let me dream, and she let me be me and find me. So I think that was like the biggest gift I had as a childhood. They'll say that when I'm 8 or 9 years old, I would start talking about conquering the world. And, to be quite honest, I probably spoke and thought more about money at a young age. I think when you were raised and you see what other people have, or you see things on TV that you don't have, there was something in me that said, okay, I can have those things. But I think now, you could talk to me for months or years and you're not going to hear me talk about money. There's much bigger things in my life and my compass. But at a young age, I was thinking, okay, make some money, hustle, have a good career. That probably meant some kind of financial success. And aside from that, I think at a young age, I thought everything was possible, and I just think that's a gift because I know a lot of people don't believe that. And so anything I saw something that was achieved, or somebody got something or somewhere or a stage or won an award or whatever, I was fortunate enough to have the dream and that vision that it was possible. So
That's that's so fascinating because, when I hear children and how they look at the world, right? For me, my parents, as you know, came here from India. They had nothing when they moved here. And I remembered my father working at a factory. My mom and dad worked at a factory for a few years, but he knew deep down inside that he didn't want to work for anyone else. Like, he knew he wanted to start his own business. And like, literally, I think I was only a few years old when they bought their first convenience store. And then they've owned many throughout. I literally grew up in convenience stores, right? But I never wanted to have my own business, because I saw how much effort and hard work you have to put into it. So, you seem to have gone and had a whole different experience, and that has led you to over, like I said, 14 different startups. So tell us a little bit more about, as you were kind of getting older, and was there some specific pivotal moments that where you were like, this is exactly what I need to do, is I want to have my own businesses. I want to start my own companies. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, you make a good point. I think if my parents were entrepreneurs, maybe I wouldn't be one today. Um, but some of my early friendships, their parents were entrepreneurs, and so I got a chance to see what it took for them. And it was never something that I was scared away from, but I just saw, okay, what I liked about the entrepreneurial, at least my perspective of it back then, was if you put the hard work in, you can get the results. You can accomplish what you want, and that seemed to be what I saw. It seemed to be what I learned from my friends and other mentors and people that came along in my life. Um, my grandfather was also a big influence. He was a full bird colonel in the Air Force, and he had that duty, honor, country, integrity, element that meant a lot to me, and probably shaped what I did in my career later. But yeah, I always tell people, like, I'm proud of my startup career, but when I started my startup career, first I did the military, so I did 6 years Army Special Ops, and my specialty is in psychological warfare. So it was like the marketing role of the Army, but I was able to be in the Special Ops Command, which means I got to jump out of planes and learn how to blow up things. And I had the boy part of me kind of exercise, but really I had an academic role. But when I came out, I was just wanted to prove to myself I could build a business. And I really think, to be honest, it could have been a taco shop, but I got on the startup journey, I guess, by serendipity. I ran into a few guys in the back of a warehouse in Las Vegas who had this idea they could connect buyers and suppliers on this new thing called the internet. And that was in 1996. And so I joined them as employee 8, helped grow it to 800 employees. I rose to the number 3, 4 person in that company. So everything that was marketing, product, customer facing, strategy was in my side of the house. We ended up going public in 1999. So 25-year-old Mark was part of a $4.5 billion market cap company. And so at a young age, I was able to see something go from an idea really to the moon. And I saw how that transformed my life financially, and everybody that worked for me and everybody that worked around me. And I think it demystified for me what it looks like to go big, because I was in every room. I was fortunate to see the good, the bad, the ugly, and there's kind of no mystery to it, coming out of that for me. So a couple of years later, the market crashed in 99 and 2000 and 2001. And I built a lot of character watching a whole bunch of, wealth being created, but also a whole bunch of wealth disappearing. And I was 25 and 26, and I had those lessons to sit with. I walked out of it better than I walked into it, but more than anything, I walked out of it with a bank account full of lessons and inspiration. And so when people say, how did you get on this journey? I'm like, well, if serendipity had not put that on my first part of the journey, I probably wouldn't be here today. But when you come out of an experience like that, you say, oh, okay. 25-year-old Mark says to himself, that was easy. Let's go do that again. I spent the last 20 years proving that that's not easy, but always being fascinated by trying to figure out what is the right element of team, vision, being in the right place at the right time, being just the right amount of lucky, execution, people. I've been fascinated about how you get that right so you can hit that kind of lightning in a bottle, and you can have a big, fantastic outcome for everybody who's involved.
Yeah, well, I mean, you talk to people that have gone through building companies, and some people seem to think that it's just like this, you just coast right through it. And like you just said, you learned a lot of lessons very early on and at such a young age. Can you maybe share a couple of those lessons with us? So for people that are tuning in right now that are thinking about starting their own journey and becoming founders and starting companies, what are some of the lessons that you've learned that you could share with them?
Yeah, I mean, I often say that I learned thousands of lessons in that first journey of my startup career, going so big, and also the downside. But the two things I always point out one was the whole demystification of going big. And I say that because I meet brilliant people every single day who have a limiting belief, and they think that going big is something that, Steve Jobs does or Elon Musk, or that's something that somebody else does. And I'm here to tell you that anybody can go big. First of all, you have to, analyze and get rid of your own limiting beliefs. But it's not all that glamorous on the inside. In fact, it's really freaking ugly on the inside most of the time. And even the ones that we all point to and we celebrate as some of the biggest successes in the last 5 or 10 years, there's tons of really ugly stories coming out of it. But that's just life, I think that life is just about figuring out how to overcome adversity and solve the problems as they come, and don't sweat the small stuff, and make sure you focus on the big stuff. And so for me, that was a big gift. I've always thought ever since that if I get the people right, the why right, the execution right, that the sky's the limit, right? So that's one of my biggest lessons that I always try to impart upon people, like, don't think small. The other thing, when you're part of something that such a wealth creation event, that I was a part of, that very few people have been a part of, and a lot of people fantasize about. But then when you're on the downside of that, we went from 800 employees and we downscaled to 40, and watching a tremendous amount of wealth being wiped out, like, you learn everything you ever needed to know about people and a whole bunch of things you probably didn't want to know about people. And I think that was one of the most valuable lessons for me, because since that day, whatever I have in the bank account or assets I have or what I don't have, and I've been to both sides of the extremes, it never defines me. But it also plays a big part in how I choose who's in my team. So I have gotten past, I don't care what logo you used to work at or how glorious your CV looks. I look past it and I'm looking for integrity and character and intestinal fortitude. I want to know how people are going to be with me in the trenches. Because life is short, and at the end of the day, we spend a lot of our time with people that we work with. And I've always tried to get the team thing right more and more. And, I'm sure we'll talk more, but I've done 14 startups. A whole bunch of them worked out. A whole bunch of them didn't work out. A whole bunch of them have scars. But when I started the studio, it was a result of me spending a year. My first year I took off in my entire life. And I just went through everything I'd gone through in my life and my career and tried to find the lessons. And the number one thing that either allowed a company to be successful, or more often than not, limited its success or made it a failure, was when the people got wrong. You let the culture get crazy, you let the culture get toxic, you brought in an asshole because they had a good resume and they ruined everything. And so walking into the studio, one of the top things, because I called you from my garage, 2.5 years ago, and said, I need a culture officer. And you're like, you're crazy. I can hear your dog barking in the background. You don't need a culture officer. Like, I do, because I know how big this is going to be. And if we don't get culture right from the beginning, it's going to be our downfall. So those are the biggest lessons for me, is get your people right. And don't underestimate how important it is to create a loving, nurturing environment, but one with accountability, and expect the best from your people, but demand accountability so you don't let the worst get in.
Yeah, no, I'll never forget that first conversation with you, Mark, because I mean, first of all, you didn't say more than like 10 words. And I was like, anything, I'm like, well, let me just ask you one question. Why do you want me to be in this role? And your answer was literally what persuaded me to join this crazy journey. And I mean, it's been like a dream come true, was when you said, you truly want to help people. And I know that you'll help us keep true to that. And I'll never forget that, because that's the kind of leaders that we need more of, And by the way, on the Nobody Inside Culture live stream show, I've talked to several people about our values and the lesson that you share about getting our people right and putting people first and making sure that we treat them well. Every single person I've interviewed that has talked about our core values have always said the same thing about you. And I don't know if you've had time to watch some of these, but they've all said that they have felt welcome in this journey from day one. That the minute they spoke with you and they talked to you and learned about your history, which we're going to go even deeper into now, because I really want people to hear more about your startup journey, especially as an executive, and share some of those, aspects that we can learn from. But the other thing that always comes up too, when people talk about you, Mark, is this idea of dream bigger. We'll come to you with an idea or some solution that we think is good, and we walk away with a whole bigger perspective. So when you say dream bigger, so many people at the studio I've had conversations with are like, Mark always does that to us. We walk out and then we have like this bigger vision in mind that, and that's your superpower. You help us dream bigger, see bigger. And so again, go back to tell us a little bit more about your startup journey, because I've heard bits and pieces of it when I've listened to your different podcasts, but I would just love for you to share some of those key pivotal moments in your career that maybe shaped, your decision to start this global venture studio during the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I appreciate, the kind words. I mean, what we're doing right now is a end result of the team itself, right? So, and the other thing that I've learned is when I started my career, dream bigger might have been the slogan, but I think now it's probably dream bigger, parentheses, but get shit done. So I think my superpower now is to dream big, but know how to understand what tomorrow means and next week means, and make sure that we're making incremental progress towards those bigger dreams. The bigger dreams get me out of bed, but the progress, pays the bills. Yeah, look, I mean, I won't go company by company, but I started out my IPO as a B2B trading platform, so we were figuring out how to connect buyers and suppliers with big corporations. We're doing RFPs and RFQs and issuing purchase orders, and it seems kind of like trivial now, but figuring out how to do that electronically through the internet, like we were a part of one or two, three companies that were inventing that in '96. So. I remember crawling under the desk of like a major Fortune 500 company's, president's desk with an AOL disk in my teeth to plug in their first internet connection. And I'm like, wait, watch it, it's coming. And watch this purchase order paint on their screen because they have a 600 baud modem. And watching this purchase order take 20 minutes to paint on the screen. So I know for any young whippersnappers on the call or listening to this later, it's hard to imagine that. But, I was part of this whole paradigm shift in the early days. So I went from B2B, trading platforms. My first experience was the internet. And I think during the internet days was like everybody thought they could wave a magic wand and everything was going to be on the internet. So .com 1.0 was like, people would be like, I'm going to do carwash.com and I'm going to do, pets.com, and everything was a .com. And I kind of left that experience wanting to get my hands dirty and seeing real business. So my next business, one of the things I saw was that a lot of purchase orders were going to domestic suppliers, but some of the best prices were coming from suppliers overseas, not just Asia, but throughout the world. And I was always curious why this massive savings wasn't being, capitalized on. And the answer was most corporations didn't have passports, and they didn't know the first thing about contracting or doing quality assurance or logistics from overseas. So we built a platform that connected big buyers to overseas suppliers, called Your Buyer Worldwide. And that was something I'm very proud of. We got a few things wrong there, but we did a lot of things right. And I personally built offices in Shanghai, Pakistan, Dubai, Mexico City, London, been to hundreds of factories. We've sourced thousands of products really across the gamut. And that, I think, has played a role into who I am now, too, because I understand how real world business works and products are made and shipped and put on shelves and bought and sold. And then I did a lot in consumer-facing e-commerce. So some of the largest e-commerce sites on the planet I've been a part of, from ABC, CBS, Discovery. Our chief of staff, Tiffany Hansen, and I met building FIFA World Cup 2010, which was the largest e-commerce site in history. We had 8.5 billion page views in 5 weeks. So selling millions of dollars to people in 140 countries was quite an experience. And then I did quite a bit, pivoted into machine learning and AI. Had a couple of companies and some small exits in the AI and machine learning space. And then I've always been a mentor, consultant, small angel into other startups really across the gamut. So, I've been a part of 14 where I was a VP, C-level, or founder. So it means I got to see the good, the bad, the ugly. But I've also been a passenger on a bunch of other startups as an advisor. So I've been passionate about the space. I always found it hard for me to say no to cool ideas. Always wanted to be in the know. Didn't want to miss out on anything. But I found it increasingly hard to give any of that the real focus and attention they deserve. And so that's probably maybe a good segue into why we created the studio.
Yeah, and I was going to say that because you've had such a fascinating journey and you've done so many different. I love the global aspect of your journey because we'll talk about on the next episode one of our core values being irrationally global, and I know how much that shapes our core value and how our vision for the studio is, and we'll talk about that next time. But yeah, let's talk about what sort of inspired you to start the studio, because I mean, you started it during the pandemic, right? So what was there something that happened that inspired you to do that? Was it something that you've been thinking about for a while? Share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I had been thinking about it for a while. I mean, I think we're in this category called venture studio, which when I named it Nobody Studios, I didn't even know venture studio was a asset class, to be honest. Um, I just thought of studios as a place that you brought creative people together and you created things, and so that's why we're called studios. Nobody is check your ego at the door. This is bigger than any one of us, and this is about making something bigger than all of us come to life. So that's the origination of the name. But yeah, I think I was the most annoying guy in the pandemic because my time that I took off was the year before the pandemic. So the year that I was figuring out what I wanted to do, and there's some health stuff going on in the family, and I was burnt out, and to be honest, it was the first time in my life that I was feeling like I was going through a low spot, energy and mentally and mental health. Um, and I came out strong and determined to build the studio. But when everybody else was in that spot during the pandemic, I was like, "Come on, guys, we're going to change the world. Look at this cool idea. Let's go build something special." So I'm sure I annoyed the hell out of people who just wanted to be depressed, but I just was coming out of that for a year. But when I was going through that, I was just asking myself, like, okay, you've been a part of 14 startups, and when I took my stock of my lessons, I had a whole bunch of things that I thought we were doing wrong, we as an industry, in terms of how we create companies. Um, I feel like a lot of times we don't incentivize our teams the right way. We don't make it a people first. So you have only a few people that really benefit from most company exits, not the rest of the team. I saw too many times where too much capital had come into a company too early and they hadn't really figured out their product market fit. And I saw that ruin things. I saw if you get board dynamics and politics too early into a company, it can really dismantle kind of the early mojo that makes startups happen. You kind of need to let startups be like teenagers. You need to have their naivety. You need to let them have their blue sky dreaming. You can't lock them down too early. But when you get a lot of capital into an early company, you take the fun out of it. And so I believe that was getting wrong. And then we're going through this valuation craze, 4 years ago when I finally decided to do the studio, which was every single person I met would tell me how they were going to be a unicorn in their space. And then I was looking at the investments, and every investment that was like a bet that said, hey, this company's going to sell for billions of dollars. And great on paper, but 80% of acquisitions happen under $300 million. And if you raise too much money, you actually take yourself out of the market for actually those kinds of exits, that sweet spot of the exit zone. And then my other belief is that technology had been kind of predictable for my 25-year career. I mean, there's some great breakthroughs, but there were like 3, 4, 5-year breakthroughs, things you could see coming. And I believe that you're going to go into a space where paradigm shifts of technology were going to start happening so rapid. And the velocity, we're going to make you constantly recalculate your own business model, your own assumptions, your own roadmaps. And that's a very scary place. But I knew that that's where the industry was going to go. And I knew the way we were building startups in the industry, the venture community, was brittle and was not going to thrive in that environment. So something new had to come around. And so I kind of combined all these things into the studio, which was how do you build companies rapidly? How do you build them in parallel? How do you get the right balance of time and capital constraints to focus on the things that matter? How do you focus on speed so you get things in the market and you get them validated by people buying them and using them and making your product better? How do you stay disciplined on how you raise capital so that you can always be available for any kind of exit that comes along if it's good for stakeholders? And you always have the option to go big when it's the right answer for a company, but it's not the only answer for a company. And I saw the whole industry going towards the only answer was go big or go home. And then I thought, the world is neglecting for the most part overseas markets. I think less than 10% of VC went overseas, 2% went to South Africa, 4% went to Latin America. I mean, these are some of the most exciting markets right now on the planet. And why are we not going there? Why is the industry not going there? Primarily because of laziness. People don't want to travel to board meetings in Africa every quarter. Um, and culturally, the culture is there to be entrepreneurial, but the ecosystem is not there. So you see really exciting entrepreneurs, but you don't have people with the background or the track record that VCs were used to. So I just saw that was a blind spot, and I wanted to make sure we built just that, a studio that created things rapidly, with time constraints and capital constraints, that put our people first and had a global view. And 3 years into it, that's what we created.
And that's perfect, right? Because look, we are at our time for our show today. I said I would get us up to 25 minutes, but you gave us the perfect segue into our next show for next Friday, because you've touched on literally all of our core values that we're going to be breaking down over the next episodes. You've gave us a little bit of a flavor of some of the lessons and challenges that you've learned in your earlier ventures and how we're doing it differently now at Nobody Studios. And so I'm going to just end it there, Mark, unless you want to add anything else, because that is the perfect way to start our next episode. So I am looking forward to the next one, because I want people to realize, as the Chief Culture Officer here, I've seen us go through a lot. And what Mark is going to share are literally, having worked with leaders like Mark my whole career, what I've learned in 2.5 years. We're going to break it all down. We're going to take you behind the scenes. We're going to show you how he has been able to lead the way during, by the way, in case you weren't aware, Nobody Studios was started during the pandemic. And a lot of us haven't even met in person yet. So join us next Friday to learn more about all of our core values and go deeper into Mark's journey, because he only just touched on it today. So we're going to keep going during our next conversation. Mark, is there anything else you want to add before we end this first episode? Thank you again for being here.
No, thank you. I mean, nobody will be defined by the people we attract to the journey, and you're a fantastic example of that. So grateful for you, Sejal. Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you. I learned from you all the time. And honestly, I could speak. Oh, and I'll just put this comment up here. We have from our Idea Lab, Min Bogeda, right? The director of Idea Lab. And he wrote, Mark, you're an inspiration to all of us. Thank you. And I completely agree. And I know all of us Nobodies really appreciate you leading the way as we build the studio. And I have no doubt we are going to innovate the way companies are created. And by the way, next time, let's not forget to talk about our equity crowdfunding campaign that we did, because that is one of the biggest things that we've done, and one of the proudest things that we've done since we joined. All right, everybody, we will see you same time next Friday. And thank you again for joining us today. Bye.
Thanks.